Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 15th of July, comes to you from London. And the dollar, fairly static this morning, very little change on the dollar index. So we're just holding the falls that we saw last week on the Federal Reserve comments of lower rates being the likely next move. So dollar remains bearish on the short-term chart. If we look at the euro, um, we see that that is in fact bullish on the chart against the dollar, that weaker dollar playing there. And against the yen, we're seeing that the dollar is bearish on all three time frames. Sterling actually losing some ground um, over the medium and long term charts, but again, that weaker dollar has helped sterling just hold into bullish short term territory. And the euro dollar, we're seeing sterling actually strengthened again last week as well. Against the Swiss franc, it's a slightly different story. Sterling is still weak here at 123.61, and against the Aussie dollar 178, so sinking lower there as well. So it's not all bullish for sterling on the short term. Bitcoin falling back to the $10,000 mark, so we're in bearish territory on the short term chart. The big thing is this a top? We've nudged through on the lagging line on the long term chart. It's quite a long consolidation pattern, but it's starting to look a little bit like a double top there for Bitcoin. So one to watch. New lows below 10,000 would give us a downside target to 8,800. The US stock market had a strong week last week on the back of those Federal Reserve comments. The S&P hitting new all-time high. The Nasdaq was higher as well, the Nasdaq 100, and the Dow was up sharply on Friday as well, hitting new all-time high as well. The Russell 2000, of course, is a long way behind that, just showing that the breadth of the market is not making new highs. It's the large caps that are doing that. The futures this morning, the S&P future is up 0.2%, and the Nasdaq E-mini is also up 0.2%. So it does suggest that the US market will open higher today. The UK market is up by a similar amount, 2.2%. So 0.2% rise there is just still not quite enough to get us into short-term bullish territory, but the US markets now should drive the UK forward. Midcaps up this morning as well, but they're not quite into bullish territory yet as well on the short-term chart. And the long-term chart has a way to go. The DAX up more sharply this morning, up nearly 1%. Still not enough to turn the short-term bullish, and the CAC Quarant is up 0.6%. So we're seeing there quite an improvement as well. The Japanese market was down just under 0.1% down, and the Hang Seng was up 0.25%, and the S&P Composite, the Shanghai Composite in China was actually up 0.4%. Given the lower GDP numbers, that's quite a move. So the GDP numbers out from China overnight were just slightly lower than were expected by the market, but the lowest in 27 years, but not enough to really dampen things there. The Indian market was up slightly, still looking very good on the long and medium term charts with lots of upside targets. The Aussie market were actually down 2/3%, so they were just hit a little bit. Crude oil remains strong on Iran fears. We're at $66 on Brent crude, 66.78 this morning, and just holding the gains that we saw last week on those fears. And WTI, much the same picture, of course. US nat gas sitting fairly static at $2.44. Been in a sideways trend for the last week or so. Gold pulling back a little bit at $1,412. So we are seeing that gold is just struggling a little bit there. And silver also just pulling back a little bit as well. US 10-year yields were up to 2.13%. So we are seeing a steady improvement there. After the Fed's comments last week, yields seemed to be just through the worst. They were pricing in maybe more of a move in interest rates. Looking at the individual stocks, this data coming to you from Yahoo Finance. Here we see really a sea of green. It was just the some of the Pacific Rim countries, Oz, and the cost B, and seeing some of these markets were down, but on the whole, we're seeing most markets are up on the back of the strong showing on Wall Street last week. The Dow constituents, the best performer was Dow Inc., and they were up 4%. Not enough to really change the picture on this chart. Caterpillar were up 3%, and again, not amazing chart, but they are recovering a little bit. We see here on the relative they're underperforming the Dow by 5% so far this year. But mostly stocks were up. A handful of four stocks were down. Looking at the Nasdaq, the best performer on Friday was JB Hunt Transport. They were up 5.9%. And if we look at the downside here, we see we had Illumina. They were down 16%, so they were hit pretty badly on Friday. Although the stock just really just starting to make a new high and then falling away. So interestingly. That stock is now not looking as good as it was. Looking at the Aussie market overnight, the best performer, Syrah Resources. We often see Syrah in the leaderboard, but these are all counter trend moves when they do this. On the whole, they've underperformed the market by nearly 50% this year in the relative. If we look at the worst performer, AMP Limited, they were down nearly 16%. That's another fall to a new low for AMP, so that's not a good looking chart. If we look at the Indian market on the Nifty 50, we had Infosys, the best performer, up 6%, and that chart looking pretty strong, pushing to new all-time highs there. Sun Pharmaceutical Industry, they were down up 3%. And the worst performers in India were India Bulls Housing, which was down, and this chart has really looked pretty terrible over the last year. Vedanta Limited also down as well, so we see here the chart looking pretty bearish. Taking a look at Europe now. We start with the UK market, top 100 stocks. Antofagasta, the best performer this morning. We're seeing miners in the UK generally, Rio, Glencore. The chart's quite noisy, not so easy to read, but we are seeing here this outperformance. Here we see the live pricing coming in from Yahoo Finance as well. Looking at the downside, we've got Microfocus Group 14% down, 4% lower. That's taking them into bearish territory on the medium-term chart, breaking the trend here on the relative as well, so not looking so good there. And if we look at midcaps in the UK, Amigo Holdings up 4%. And then on the downside, the 250, Sports Direct down 9%, so that's a really big fall for them this morning, and really that's starting to push them to the levels that we're seeing the low point at the end of last year, so not a good looking chart there. Last of all, just a look at Europe. If we go for the best performers, BASF in Germany, this chart not looking great. BMW, the next chart, next best performer, and again the chart not looking great. Airbus is the third best performer, up 1.3%, and here the chart does look really good, breaking to new highs, outperforming the Dow Jones Index by 25% this year so far. And if we look at the four worst performers, we see here there's only a handful: Deutsche Telekom, Danone, etc. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.